Hey students, this is Miss Went, and this is the first set of notes for our biochemistry unit. And sometimes this unit is also called macromolecules. Okay, so bio means living, like biology is the study of living things. Chemistry would be chemicals. So this is the chemicals that make up living things. So what chemicals are your bones and your brain and your blood and your skin made out of? Okay. And we're going to focus on 4 main macromolecules. Okay, you're made of hundreds of different chemicals, but for a high school class, we're going to focus on kind of the 4 main big guys, and you're going to realize you've heard of these before. We've just never talked about them in this way before. Okay, now the word macro, or the prefix macro here, means very large. And then a molecule is at least 2 different atoms that are bonded together. So macromolecules are huge amounts of atoms that are bonded together. Okay? So the plan here is these notes, I have a fill-in-the-blank worksheet that you can use for the notes. If you prefer to just summarize them in your own notebook, that's fine. Usually I give a paper copy of the worksheet to students. That may not be possible if we are in a distance learning situation, but it is on Notability. It is on Schoology. You can put it in Notability. Okay. We're going to do the notes in chunks. In between some of the notes, we're going to do some other activities. One of them is a cut and paste activity that I usually would do with paper and scissors, but I have a Google way of trying it out this year, which will be cool. We have an enzyme lab that we have videos for in case we're doing distance learning, and some other cool things too. So when you look at the worksheet, the fill-in-the-blank worksheet, it's really like 4 sets of notes. All of them so it's broken down so it's not overwhelming all at once. So let's get started, guys. So first page. Now if you're doing the fill-in-the-blank notes, the red words are going to be what you fill in the blanks. Okay, and the black words are printed on your worksheet. So it says macromolecules at the top, and this is not just a pretty font. We'll come back to how this is written out later. There's a purpose for that kind of title. Okay, so introduction here, all compounds, so all chemicals on planet Earth can be classified into 2 broad categories, or 2 big groups. First group is organic compounds. And if you are an organic chemical, you must have carbon atoms and hydrogen atoms. And you might remember from physical science, carbon, the letter C is the symbol for carbon, and the letter H is the symbol for hydrogen. And you can always just write the symbol instead of the full word if you want to. So an example of an organic compound here's one we talked about before, CH4. This is methane. It's one of our greenhouse gases. So it's made of 1 carbon atom, 4 hydrogen atoms. That's cool. That is an organic compound. Organic compounds tend to be made from living things. You maybe have heard of carbon-based life forms in some kind of science fiction movie. Not everything with carbon is organic, though. It's got to have hydrogen, too. And these are the types of chemicals that actually the robots on Mars are looking for that would indicate evidence that there might be life there. It's not a guarantee, but it's like a first step if they can find chemicals that have both carbon and hydrogen together. Okay, so organic compounds we kind of signify as being associated with living things, but they're not all necessarily made from living things. There are exceptions. The other huge category of everything else is inorganic compounds. So you see, same word, we just put a prefix on the front to mean not. So not organic. And these chemicals can have carbon or it can have hydrogen, but they don't have both. So one example that's pretty common in our life is water. H2O has 2 hydrogens and an oxygen, but it does not have carbon. Okay, so water would be inorganic. So organic must have carbon and hydrogen. If it doesn't, everything else in the universe fits into this second category of inorganic. Okay, so we are going to focus on organic compounds. Inorganic, you can learn more about in chemistry class. All right, so most of your body's molecules are organic. They have both carbon and hydrogen. And we said this word before, macromolecules. Macro means large or very large. Macromolecules are built from small organic compounds the same way a railroad train is built, by linking lots of smaller units together in long chains. Okay, so each one of these little boxes here might be a little organic chemical. Like maybe this is a methane, this is another methane, this is another methane. And if we put thousands of them and just put them together in big long chains, that's going to make a huge chemical. And that huge chemical is called a macromolecule. Okay, so we're going to learn about these little pieces, like these little building blocks that we put together to make big chemicals. So these little pieces are really important to us. And you can picture these little pieces as kind of like being Legos. You know, they come in little tiny pieces. There might be some different shapes and colors, but they're all pretty little. But if you put enough of them together, you can make a huge structure with it. So that's kind of what we're going to be thinking about, these macromolecules. Okay. So the little tiny individual pieces have a special name. They are called monomers. And the prefix mono here, mono means one. So one little piece. And you'll see it abbreviated in different ways in simple drawings. It might be like a box or it might be a circle, but it always has connectors on both sides so it can connect to another chemical. And it might be the same as itself or it might be a different kind of chemical. Okay, so large carbon compounds are built up from small simple molecules called monomers. And when you put a bunch of them together, we get a polymer. So poly means many. And you have a whole bunch of these guys linked together. So this polymer is made of 6 monomers put together. Okay, so monomer means one, polymer means many. And if you put many, many, many polymers together, you can get this huge thing called a macromolecule. Okay, so this is kind of like one, this is many, this is humongous with a whole ton of them. Okay, so one goal I have for you is you could put these in order from biggest to smallest. I hope that you know what these prefixes mean. One, many, and very large. Okay, so those prefixes are important. Okay, now with this being a video, remember at any time you can pause this and go back or pause it and fill things in. But I'm going to keep moving forward just for people that are able to write faster, maybe have the worksheet to fill in the blanks. All right, so putting these guys together. So if you look at the little picture here, if I have 2 separate monomers and I want to put them together and connect them, that's going to take a chemical reaction. And the chemical reaction kind of has 2 names, but this name with the star by it, this is the one that I always use. And this is the one you're going to see in your tests and quizzes. Okay? It's just that some older textbooks or older professors might use this term here. So it says monomers link, so that means connect together, to form polymers through a chemical reaction called either a condensation reaction or dehydration synthesis. Okay, and dehydration means if you're dehydrated, your body's thirsty, like you lost a bunch of water and you have to put the water back in. Okay, so dehydration means we're going to take a bunch of water out. We're going to dry it out. And synthesis is a word that maybe you remember from physical science. This is a chemical reaction where you build things. Okay, so during the formation of polymers, water is released, or it's what we call a byproduct, or like an extra leftover of the reaction. So anytime I have 2 monomers and they come together to build something else, I'm always going to have this leftover water. Always. No exceptions. Okay? So that's why it's called dehydration synthesis. We took some water out of these chemicals and now it's left over at the end. And I built something bigger than what I had before. Now there is an opposite to this as well. Okay, the opposite of this is called hydrolysis. So the breakdown of some complex molecules, such as polymers, occurs through a process known as hydrolysis. Excuse me. So hydro is water, and then this ending lysis, that means to separate or to break apart. Okay, so if we add water, it's going to break apart. And think about this like if you have a cup of sugar, and if you add some drops of water to the sugar breaks apart and dissolves away. Adding water back to it will make it separate. Okay, hydrolysis or hydrolysis. So the individual parts is hydro and lysis, but for some reason in English, when we put it all together, we call it hydrolysis. If you pronounce it wrong, it's perfectly fine. People do it all the time. All right, so this is the reverse or the opposite of the dehydration reaction at the top. The addition of water to some polymers can break the bonds that hold them together. All right, now think about you eating food. All right, when you eat food, you start off with something big. You add water to it. Think of all the liquid in your mouth that you add to it when you're chewing. Maybe you drink some water or soda or coffee when you eat. Adding more water, that's going to help your body break down the food you eat. Okay? Hydrolysis is how you digest your food. Now, it's used for lots of other things in your body also, but digesting your food is a big part of this. You add liquid to your food and it helps break it into tiny pieces. It breaks those big polymers apart into tiny monomers. Okay, so we're going to make sure we know these two reactions really, really well. They're opposites of each other. So if you learn one of them really well, just know the other one's the opposite. Okay, now you do not have to write this example down. You're going to see this again on a couple activities later, so I just want to introduce it now. This chemical right here that I'm outlining with my cursor, this chemical is called sucrose. And this is the kind of sugar that you like add to your coffee or bake cookies with, okay? And you can kind of see it's built into two parts. There's one part over here, and then there's another part over here, and they're connected together, okay? So this is two monomers big. Monomer here, monomer here. All the O's stand for oxygen, the H's are hydrogen, the C's are carbon. So it's organic because it has carbon and hydrogen in it. And what happens is if I add water to it, so here's the water. So if I have my sugar and I add some water to it, there's going to be a chemical reaction, which we signify with an arrow here. And we end up with two separate pieces broken apart. And this first little piece here is called glucose. That's the really simple sugar that we make during photosynthesis. We'll learn more about that later. And then this little piece over here is a different kind of sugar called fructose. And this is the sweet sugar that you'd have like in an apple. So a little bit different taste. Okay, because if you think about it, the sweetness of an apple is going to taste different than the sweetness of a candy bar, right? They're both sweet, but they have a different taste to it. All right, so that's an example here of hydrolysis. I had something that was two monomers big, added some water, and it broke apart into separate pieces. So you're going to model this later this week. So we just wanted to introduce that to you with these vocab words. Okay, now if you have the fill in the blank worksheet, you have an empty space kind of in the middle of the page. We're going to make a table. We're going to compare these two. If you're writing notes in a notebook, you want to make a T-chart table. And we're going to put dehydration synthesis on one side and hydrolysis on the other. And remember, they are exact opposites of each other. All right? So, some things we've learned. In dehydration, we remove water. Hydrolysis, we have to add water. They are opposites of each other. Okay, another thing, dehydration synthesis, I'm going to build bigger things. I'm going to take little pieces and build big stuff. Hydrolysis, I'm going to split things apart into little pieces. Now, this is something we haven't talked about yet. In dehydration synthesis, this chemical reaction will store energy for later. Hydrolysis is going to release energy. Now, this kind of makes sense. We said hydrolysis is like you breaking your food down. You eat food for energy. So breaking the food into little pieces is going to release that energy. So that makes sense. The opposite is over here. This is how we store energy. When plants build food, when plants are making leaves and carrots and tomatoes and apples, they are storing energy in those fruits and vegetables for us. Okay. If you look at the chemistry piece of this, dehydration synthesis, we're making chemical bonds to put things together. So we have to make new chemical bonds. In hydrolysis, we break those chemical bonds apart into little pieces. Okay. And of course, if you need to pause the video to get caught up writing, please do that. Now the next page, I have another chart like this. So what I usually do if I have everybody together in the classroom is we'll kind of do the notes and then we'll get into groups and make lists, and then we'll share our lists around the room and kind of make a big master list on the whiteboard. Okay, so I have one of those boards that another group came up with to show you. So it's a lot of the same info, just written a little differently. So this list, these 4 things are the most important, but if you see something good on the next page you want to add, please add it. It might be something that just makes more sense to you than the way we wrote it here. All right, so same idea here. This group says dehydration synthesis was removing water to put stuff together, hydrolysis, adding water to separate. So just kind of a different definition of the words. They said dehydration synthesis, we start with tiny monomers and build bigger polymers. The opposite over here, we have the big things turning into small things. Okay, and then they drew little pictures with it too, showing these are separate, now they're together. These are together, now they're separate. Making bonds, breaking bonds. They had these words from chemistry class, I believe, constructive and destructive. We aren't going to get that into chemistry, but they're kind of cool words. They said storing energy and releasing energy. And then removing and adding water. Okay, so again, if any of those things make sense to you, especially like maybe this picture here, this blue part, maybe you want to add that to your chart real quick. Now I just have one more little bit to show you, and that's going to bring us to the end of the first page and the end of this section of notes. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide here. There are 4 main types of macromolecules found in living organisms. Okay, so your body parts, all of your bone, your blood, your skin, your hair, your heart, your lungs, your fingernails are basically made of these 4 big chemicals or groups of chemicals. Okay, and we're going to kind of have a day of notes for each one of them and like a little activity or worksheet for each one of them. Okay, so I'm going to introduce all 4 now, but know that you're going to learn more about all of them in the future. So the first one there is carbohydrates. And you might be thinking, wait, that's like a food term. It is a food term, right? Carbohydrates are made of carbon atoms and hydrogen atoms. And the food that you eat comes from living things. So it makes sense that the food you eat are going to be made of these same chemicals. So carbohydrate food would include bread, pasta, tortillas, corn, grains, and also anything with sugars in them. So like fruit, honey, all those would have carbohydrates in them. Okay. Next one is lipids, and lipids are, you guys think of them as fats with regards to food usually. So oil and butter, olive oil, avocados have a lot of lipids in them. Okay. Proteins would be another one. And food that you eat that has a lot of protein would be meat, dried beans like refried beans or pinto beans. Dried peas would have a lot of protein in it. Milk, cheese, yogurt have a lot of protein in it. And then the last one is going to be one that's not as familiar as these other three. That's nucleic acids. And you might think of acids as like, oh, like that's orange juice. Well, yeah, technically, but nucleic acids actually are the group of chemicals that include your DNA, which all living things have DNA. Okay. Now, all four of these chemicals are organic, so I made that little symbol off to the side. So all four of these have carbon atoms and hydrogen atoms. Some of them are going to add other types of atoms also, like oxygen or nitrogen, and we'll learn more about them in the future. Okay, so this should finish the first page of your notes. If you miss something, go back and find it, or, visit with a friend or something. You are going to turn in the full notes packet, but not for like a week. Okay, we're going to take it just a little piece at a time. The back page of the packet is kind of a review of everything. So now that you have the first page done, there's probably a few questions on the back page you're able to answer. So you could take a look at that if you want to, or you could wait till the notes are all done and do the back page all together. So this is going to end the video, guys. Have a great day. We'll see you later.